Leviticus 13. Last time we finished off our examination of some fairly random instructions that God is giving to the people of Israel. That was back in chapters 19 and 20. We discussed the civic standings. We discussed how to get along with your neighbors, the importance of that. We discussed various things in regards to religion and just some general principles that God had for all of the people. This evening, though, we're going to be in 13 and 14. And this one and next one is going to be fun for y'all, because this is leprosy, and then next time will probably be discharges, which discharges in the book of Leviticus, gross. Sorry. And I'll probably be very gross with them because I don't have a lot of filters. Leprosy is a very interesting one, though. In chapter 13, we're going to have all of the various ways to diagnose the leprosy. And in chapter 14, we're going to have all the various ways of how to come back from having leprosy. Before we get into it too deeply, I do want to talk about the word leprosy. When we think of leprosy, we think of like a flesh-eating, body parts falling off. We think of the medieval times era, and you've got people that are just losing whole limbs. Like, that's really what our mind goes to with leprosy. In Leviticus, that's not really what it's talking about. The root words for the Hebrew are not referencing that at all. It comes from words that means to scourge or to be afflicted with. They're much more simple skin conditions more than they are full-on body parts rotting off. That doesn't really come in until about 300 or 400 BC. We start seeing a lot of that kind of disease entering into the realm. So when we think about it here, that's not what we're thinking about. I know the word still is leprosy, but the reason we still call it leprosy is because in the Septuagint, in about 300 BC, when they translated it from Hebrew, they put the word lepra, which is the Greek word for leprosy, and so we continue to struggle with that even to this day. It's very similar to how in the New Testament they keep using the word baptism, when that's not really a real word. They could have just translated it and called it submersion or to be dunked, and we would have had a lot fewer problems. But we still deal with it because that's what the translators did way back when. So in chapter 13, when we talk about leprosy, we have a general principle, and then we have a whole host of specifics. To ad nauseum specifics. It's ridiculous at times exactly how minute they had to be. We're talking about these priests needing to be, in effect, the doctors of their day, making a good, strong diagnosis. I think also it's important for us to realize before we really get into it that God expected you to recover from leprosy, Levitical leprosy. He expected it fully. There's very little indication of what do you do when somebody has leprosy and it's going on for a very long time. Every expectation, every step of the way is you're going to clear it up in a week or two. It's going to get better in at most a month, and you're going to recover from this. Very rarely, according to Levitical style leprosy, is it something that you need to leave the camp and you're going to be out of the camp for the next 15 years until you're dead. Like that just doesn't happen. And that's a bit of the difference between the style of leprosy dealt with in time of Christ, where we do see lepers who are stuck outside of the camp and they live in leper colonies and so forth, and the style of Leviticus where we don't see that. Any comments on that before we get reading in 13? Yeah.
To go to Louisiana to see the only leper center in the world. At that time, they only had one leper, and they're from another country. But it is a prison. They do not let those people out, and they do not let anybody in because they still don't have a cure for whatever they're calling leprosy right now.
Yeah, and that's the one that really the body is rotting away, which is usually where our mind goes with it. All right, let's start reading. Chapter 13, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, and he said, when a person has a spot, or when a person has on his skin of his body a swelling or an eruption or a spot, and it turns into a case of leprous disease on the skin of his body, he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priest, and the priest shall examine the diseased area of the skin on his body. We'll stop there. That is principle number one. If you think you got it, or somebody else thinks you've got it, you must present to the priest, because we're talking about not necessarily infection rates here, which is going to come in. Like, we can talk about that because we're 21st century, that's the way we're going to think. But what we're really looking at here is issues of uncleanness. Is this person clean or is he not? Can he bring a sacrifice or can he not? Can he be in the holy convocation or can he not? Remember, every single week they have one holy convocation on Saturday, on the 7th day of the week. Can he assemble with them or can he not? Can you touch him or can you not? Can you buy his goods at his stall or can you not? So this is going to impact every single aspect of their life, whether or not this person is clean or he is unclean. So you must bring him before either Aaron or one of his sons. It's also very interesting that you can choose. Aaron is included right in there. And if you've got a crowd of about 2 million people, that's just getting larger and larger and having new people coming in with new problems all day, you're going to want all 4 of them to be involved in this. At this point, I think there's 3. There was 5. So yeah, you're going to want as many people as you possibly can to be taking a look at these ill individuals. We talk sometimes about what did the priests do with their day. This is another thing I imagine they dealt with daily. Somebody coming in, having to do some checkups, having to do some examinations with them. Okay, so let's be specific. The first general principle is found from about verse 3 all the way down through verse 17, I believe. So this is the first discussion of what do you do if you have a leprous problem. Continuing to read in verse 3, it says, if the hair of the diseased area has turned white and the disease appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it's a case of leprous disease. When the priest has examined him, he shall pronounce him unclean. If the spot is white in the skin of his body and appears no deeper than the skin, the hair is not turned white, the priest shall shut up the diseased person for 7 days. The priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the disease is checked and the disease is not spread in the skin, the priest shall shut him up for another 7 days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day. If the diseased area has faded and the disease has not spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only an eruption, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. If the eruption spreads on the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again before the priest, and the priest shall look, and if the eruption has spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprous disease. Okay, I'm not going to make you memorize what does it mean if the hair is white and the skin is not, and what if there's red involved. I made you do that with the sacrifices. I'm not going to make you do it with this. I told Rachel I debated just rushing through chapter 13 because I'm not a medical professional and it's tedium to me. That's saying something because I'll spend all day long on a sin offering. This is tedious. But he establishes principles, and that's what I think is important for us to understand, is that you can have a skin problem and it not be leprous, meaning that you are clean. But notice what he does here. He establishes how to identify it. If the skin is a certain way and the hair is a certain way, you're automatically leprous. If the hair is not, or the skin doesn't quite seem exactly like what you're expecting, which if you've seen about 100,000 cases of it, you're going to pretty fast identify yes and no. Like, this is not going to take very long for these priests to become very good at their jobs. If you're not really sure, he's quarantined. Use our modern word. For 7 days. Check him again. If you're still, it doesn't really seem to be getting any worse. It doesn't necessarily seem to be getting any better. Quarantine him again. Another 7 days. And God says at the end of that 7 days, either it's getting better or it's not. So you're going to make your decision based on that. If it looks like it's getting better, he's going to be pronounced clean before the priest in verse 7. Otherwise, it's leprous. And now we have to deal with what do you do with a guy who has leprous disease. Any questions on identification?
Right.
I know, right? Like, people try to identify it. Don't try. Just don't. Just literally study any other thing than trying to identify what in the world's going on here. Like, just don't. Just this is what it is, and move on. This is not an appropriate waste of your time. There are some appropriate wastes of your time, and I'll encourage you to do those. This is not one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, think about the poor priest that got elected to this duty.
Yes. Yes. I think it's also, you think about this priest in regards to what God has to do for him. if he is encountering on a daily basis, let's just say conservatively 10 individuals he has to be checking. He's probably got another 20 or so that he's got quarantined and he's got to check at various points in time, right? He does not get sick. He does not catch leprosy as a result of this interaction. There's no indication in Leviticus that he even really needs to take any precautions whatsoever for himself. And so there is a protection that God provides to his priests, this kind of subtle, miraculous thing that you and I realize, because we know about infections and we know about how things can spread and so forth, and depending on what's going on here, it could be more or less contagious. But it's fascinating to me that he has no concern for himself, none whatsoever.
Wandering in the desert, or did it always?
Always there.
It's always been there.
Yeah, always there. That area, I mean, you talk about skin conditions, that place has got tons of skin conditions. Even today, they still struggle with a whole host of skin problems due to heat, due to sand, and just gross things in the sand. I mean, it's just, you're wandering in the wilderness. You're not as clean as you'd like to be. Things are not as nice as you'd like to be. You don't get out of the sun as often as you'd like. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of skin conditions. I mean, just think about sunburn. What does sunburn look like? It looks like a reddening of the skin, and you're going to need to go present yourself to the priest. Yeah, you got to go to the priest. Makes you wonder if that's why they covered as much as they do.
Population estimate at this time for them, do you know?
What do they say? 600,000 or so fighting men. If each of them are married, each of them have one kid. We're getting up to 2 million pretty fast.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there would be a lot.
Excluding Levites, like they're not included in that number, so I don't know how many there are.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of people. So conservatively, seeing 10 people a day is probably a small number. Yeah.
The priests, of course, to examine everybody, but with that many people, you're going to have a lot of priests to do all the sacrifices.
Yeah. They were very busy. Very busy. All the way up until Solomon, when he had to make schedules because they had too many priests. At that point, I imagine that they kind of got a bit of a break. So let's talk about what do you do. Verse 9. When a man is afflicted with a leprous disease, he shall be brought to the priest shall look. If there's a white swelling in the skin, and that the hair has turned white, and there is a raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprous disease of the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not shut him up, for he is unclean. If the leprous disease breaks out on the skin, so the leprous disease covers all of the skin of the diseased person from head to foot, so far as the priest can see, then the priest shall look. If the leprous disease has covered all of his body, he shall pronounce him clean of his disease. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But when raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. Raw flesh is unclean, for it is leprous disease. If the raw flesh recovers and turns white again, then he shall come to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and if the disease has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce the diseased person clean. He is clean. I'm going to say it again. I don't want to get bogged down in what in the world is this disease. I'm not a medical professional, and I don't care. Now, that being said, it's kind of fascinating to look at how God establishes this, isn't it? He starts off with, you've got a man who has the swelling, his hair is turned white, he has raw flesh, it's leprous, you're done, unclean. But then he says there's a few other things that can happen here. What do you do if somebody has had a leprous disease for so long that it has spread throughout the entirety of his body, but all of it has turned white? That may reference scabbing. It may reference just simply the fact that what once was red now has gone back to natural skin color. Y'all can argue about that later. But the point is, it's covered everything. And there no longer remains an open wound of any sort. There is no raw flesh. There is no redness anywhere. This person who has had it cover all of his body, which probably took some time, is now clean. He can rejoin. He can come back unless a new eruption occurs, unless something becomes red, something becomes raw flesh again, and then he has to go through the full examination process once again. Any comments on that before we go further?
By bacteria, and the whole body's covered, then and there's not any oozing areas or anything, he's pretty clean.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the purpose. All right. What if you got a boil? That's verse 18. If there is in the skin of one's body a boil and it heals, in the place of the boil comes a white swelling or reddish white spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall look. If it appears deeper than the skin and its hair is turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease that has broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it and there's no white hair in it, it's not deeper than the skin and is faded, the priest shuts him up for 7 days. If it is spread in the skin, he pronounces him unclean. It's a disease. If the spot remains in one place and does not spread, it's the scar of the boil. The priest pronounces him unclean. So notice now a separation between you've got a weird discoloration, you've got all of your body getting a weird discoloration, and there's some raw flesh. Now we've got a boil. What do you do with all of these kinds of things? And so we've got more and more categories of how to be unclean and how to be clean. All right, let's go on to 24. When the body is a burn on its skin, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a spot, reddish white or white, the priest examines it, the hair in the spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, then it's a leprous disease, it's broken out in the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It's a case of leprous disease. If the priest examines it and there is no white in the spot, or it is no deeper than the skin, but has faded, the priest shall shut him up for 7 days. The priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it is spreading, the priest will pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease. If it remains in one place, it does not spread on the skin, but has faded, it's swelling from the burn, the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar of the burn. So there's your sunburn, right? Or you stuck your hand in the fire, or your mom hit you over the head with a pot that used to be on the fire. You got a swelling going on, you go to the priest, you get it checked out. Then we have some of my favorites. Not as good as later on. We're going to really like later on. But when a man or a woman, in verse 29, has a disease on the head or the beard, the priest examines the disease. So we've got on your skin, easy to see. Now we're moving towards harder to see areas under the hair, under the beard. If it appears deeper than the skin and the hair in it is yellow, there's a new color, and thin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It's an itch, a leprous disease of the head or the beard. If the priest examines the itching disease and it appears no deeper than the skin and there's no black hair in it, the priest shall shut up the person with the itching disease for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the disease. If it's not spread and there is no yellow hair, the itch appears no deeper than the skin, he shall shave himself, but the itch he shall not shave. The priest shall shut up the person with the itching disease for another 7 days. Isn't that weird? Did you guys catch what just happened there? This guy's got this weird spot right here, and so he shaves everything else except for that one weird spot. And I'd be glad to be shut up for 7 days. Anyways, let's keep reading. I don't even know where I was. I just got caught on that one. Verse 34. On the 7th day, the priest examines the itch. If the itch has not spread in the skin and appears no deeper than the skin, the priest will pronounce him clean. He washes his clothes and he's clean. If the itch has spread in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. If the itch has spread in the skin, the priest does not need to seek for the yellow hair. He is unclean. But if in his eyes the itch is unchanged, the black hair has grown in, the itch is healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. So, weird hair skin stuff. It's got its own category of how to deal with that. Any comments before we go further? Don't you love it? It's just fantastic. Okay, 38. When a man or a woman has spots in the skin of the body, white spots, the priest shall look. If the spots on the skin are of a dull white, it is leukoderma that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. Not a medical professional. I'm not going to try to get into what that is. Again, I don't care. But notice the principle here is now we're not just talking about has it turned white. We're talking about what kind of white it turned, which rules me out as a priest because I'm colorblind. And I would never be able to know the difference. So just think about that. Today, 1 in 10 men are colorblind. I hope it wasn't the same ratio back then, or they got a lot of priests that get disqualified just because they can't tell the difference between white and pale white. Anyways. And then my favorite, verse 40. If a man's hair falls out from his head, he is bald. He is clean. If a man's hair falls out from his forehead, he has baldness of the forehead. He is clean. Just love the way the ESV words that. He is bald. End. Period. You're done. Anyways, 42. If there is on the bald head or the bald area a reddish-white diseased area, it is a leprous disease breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. In case you forgot that he was bald, we're going to keep saying the word a lot. Then the priest shall examine him, and if the diseased swelling is reddish-white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, like the appearance of a leprous disease in the skin of the body, he's a leprous man, he's unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean. His disease is on his head. Any comments or thoughts on that? Sorry. I just love that section. It's just so matter of fact.
Well, there had to be a bunch of lepers. And is there anything anywhere, I haven't read, what did they do? Because they had colonies. I know they had leper colonies where they go and live. Is anything in the Bible about that?
A lot of the leper colonies don't come till later. By and large, in the wandering years, in the judges' years, and even in the period of the kings, if you were a leper, you just lived with them. You didn't really go out and live outside of the city yet. You were unclean, so there's a lot of rules with that. Like, people can't touch your house, they can't touch the stuff you're touching, they can't really buy your goods, or they are ritually unclean until evening. But by and large, they don't really go out and develop leper colonies. We don't really see those starting to come in, even historically, until more like 300 to 400 BC, which is a good, 1,000 years after this? So most of Jewish history until the time of Christ, when we do see them having to be outside because they stay unclean, then they start making those leper colonies, especially in Judaism. Do you have a thought?
As you're reading through this and just kind of imagining it, and there's just so many common things that you treated at the pediatric clinic that gets lumped into this.
Yeah.
And just, when you were talking about the beard, I take allergy medicine, 10 months out of the year. So one year I tried Flonase. Well, a side effect of Flonase is it makes you itch. And so I broke out right here on my jawline from the Flonase. And I was scratching it. As you're reading about itching in the beard, I'm thinking, okay, I got Flonase problem. But according to this, I'm a leper. And I got to stay in the house for 7 days and stop taking my Flonase.
And shave everything.
And shave everything except my jawline.
Yeah.
I mean, this is covering stuff that is so common. And I know when I preached that sermon on Naaman last Sunday, I loosely made that leprosy sin connection.
Yeah.
But that's what we do. The Bible never does that. But that's what we do.
Yeah.
When we come to this, and maybe we forget, like you said at the beginning, this is really common stuff.
Clay, are you unclean?
I'm not now. I take not Flonase, but Rhinocort. So I'm good to go.
Change the medication.
I changed my medication, so I'm clean now.
All right. You've been pronounced unclean. You're a leprous person. What is the first things that you've got to do? Verse 45. It says, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes, let the hair of his head hang loose, he shall cover up his upper lip, and he cries out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean, he shall live alone, his dwelling is outside of the camp, except for the cities, they get a little different there. So, that's his first principle. This is the first things that he does, is he has to tear everything, he has to cover his upper lip, I think is the way that the Hebrew words it, which talks about wearing some kind of a veil over his face, which we today would call a mask. And everywhere he goes, he has to shout, unclean, unclean. This is his immediate principle. But Leviticus does not leave him outside of the camp. Like, that's not his permanent location. He comes back in frequently in order to be checked. Anytime there's a change of his skin, anytime that there's something new that the priest has to examine, he has to present himself once again before the priest. And the expectation of Leviticus is he's going to become clean very quickly. It's not build a permanent home. That's not Leviticus's purpose. Any other thoughts? He has to let the hair of his head hang loose. He has to be noticeable. That's what we're getting at here. He is a permanent unclean person. He needs to be noticeable to everybody around him. Because if they bump him just walking on the road, they themselves have now become unclean. They're unclean until evening. They have to wash and so forth and so on. It could. I don't know. I mean,
You covered your head a lot, would be much more noticeable.
yeah, it very well could be just the turban idea. It could be similar to a Nazirite idea of not cutting hair as well and letting it go long.
Just doing this for 7 days on and off,
Yeah, the turban would be much more
it would be much more noticeable
Yeah.
than waiting and waiting and waiting for your hair to grow.
Yeah. Which I read one scholar as well, when it talks about covering up his upper lip, they said that the way they did it was they took the bottom of their garment and they put it up over their face. So like, even think about how weird that looks. Like, this guy's walking around with the bottom of his pant leg up here, and like, so he's very noticeable. Everybody knows exactly who he is. Any other thoughts?
That because when Jesus talked about going to the closet and praying, their closet was pulling their outward garment till it over their head, and that was going to the closet to pray. So here they were pulling that over their head as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Okay.
This, it must not have been like COVID or anything like that, not real contagious at all.
Yeah.
Because they're moving in and out of, and being with the people and not being with, and so it makes sense that it's just not a real contagious bug.
Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. So what about if you get leprosy on your garment? I know, right? How many of us, when you started this, was like, you know what, I really wonder what happens if your garment catches leprosy. Well, just wait. Next chapter, we get to talk about your house catching leprosy. So again, that's why when we say leprosy, we don't mean the one leprosy disease we call today. Like, that's not what we're talking about. But verse 47, when there is a case of leprous disease in a garment or woolen or linen garment, in the warp or the woof, or of linen or of wool, or in a skin, or in anything made of skin, if the disease is greenish or reddish in the garment, if the skin or in the warp or the woof or in any article of the skin, it is a case of leprous disease, it shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the disease, shut up that which has the disease for 7 days. Yes, you quarantine the piece of fabric. It shuts it up, and then he shall examine the disease on the 7th day. If the disease has spread in the garment, in the warp or the woof or in the skin, whatever be the use of the skin, the disease is a persistent leprous disease. It's unclean. He shall burn the garment or the warp or the woof, the wool or the linen or whatever, or any article made of skin that is diseased. It's a persistent leprous disease. It shall be burned in fire. Verse 53. If the priest examines, and if the disease has not spread in the garment, in the warp or the woof, or in any article made of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which has the disease. He shall shut it up for another 7 days. The priest shall examine the diseased thing after it has been washed. If the appearance of the diseased area has not changed, though the disease has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it with fire, whether the rot is on the back or the front. If the priest examines it and the diseased area has faded after it has washed, he shall tear it out of the garment, or in the skin, or in the warp or the woof. If it appears again in the garment, or in the warp or the woof, or in any article made of skin, it is spreading, you shall burn with fire whatever has the disease. But the garment or the warp or the woof or any article made of skin from which the disease departs when you have washed it shall then be washed a second time and be clean. This is the law for a case of leprous disease in a garment of wool or linen, whether in the warp or the woof or in any article made of skin, to determine whether it is clean or unclean. So general principle is this. You've got your garment, you've got your skin, it's got something weird on it, you take it to the priest. The priest examines it. If he determines that, yes, in fact, this is a leprous thing, you burn it. Done. Everybody goes home. It's great. But if he's unsure, and he's not really, he doesn't know, he shuts it up for 7 days, takes a look at it again. You don't make any modifications to it, because he wants to see what is it going to do naturally. What's going to happen? If it doesn't seem to have changed, if it's still kind of exactly the same, you wash it, shut it up again, check it again, and if it seems as though it's not spread anywhere, it becomes clean, you take out that part that had it, and it now is okay. If at any point it looks like it is actually leprous, you burn it. Any comments, thoughts? I had to look up what is a warp or a woof, so I had no idea. It has to do with weaving fabric together. In one direction is the warp, and one direction is the woof. I don't remember which direction's which, though. So ask somebody who knows how to weave.
We would think not a whole lot of that right now, because, we've got walk-in closets full of clothes.
Yeah.
We just burn it, but for them, now they, it may take them a long time to make, or, buy a pipe from somewhere. It takes a while to make it.
Yeah.
They make what they're doing. And I just think back to, the day when God told Adam, from now on, with the sweat of your brow, you're going to work and feed yourself that way. All of these things would not even have been necessary without sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
These onerous things.
Yes. And the tedium of them. Yes. Any other thoughts?
Wear out, their shoes didn't wear out. I had a hard time putting all that together.
Yes. They don't wear out, but they could get leprosy. Which, think about how that works. What message is God saying if for the last 37 years you've worn the same shirt, but today you get leprosy on it? What message is he trying to send to you? Compared to, okay, you've been in the land of Canaan for who knows how long, and you've got your king set on the throne, and this garment's got a problem. Well, that probably happens pretty frequently because our garments wear out all the time. It's going to have a much different impact for God to all of a sudden remove that protection. Yeah. Any other thoughts? It's a good comment. Mm-hmm.
Do we still have leprosy in the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Several years ago, me and my wife and the two kids, I don't remember where we was at Orange Beach or Gulf Shores, but we got on the party boat. They took us out 12 miles to what had been a leper colony. It looked like a military fort, what it looked like. And it was spooky knowing that at one time that had been a leper colony.
Yeah. Yes, modern leprosy, definitely they're very much quarantined. You talked about the one in Louisiana, yeah. Levitical leprosy, I probably conservatively can guess there's at least 25 people or so in this room that have Levitical leprosy in one way or another. You got some weird coloring on your skin. You got in the sun over the weekend. It hasn't quite faded. I mean, just think about that for just a moment. You got some weird itch that just won't seem to go away. Yeah, how about 25 of us or so have Levitical leprosy? Okay, any comments anybody has? Any other thoughts? We got about 12 minutes. So I think what I want to do, we'll go ahead and get into 14 because I don't think we're going to get very far. Because when you talk about getting clean, in Leviticus or under the law of Moses in general, the normal process deals with washings and sacrifices. And they're usually pretty straightforward. Go, wash your clothes, wash your body, kill the animals, put them on the altar, done. But when it comes to leprosy, it gets weird. Okay, so if you haven't read ahead, you're thinking, oh, what could be happening? If you have read ahead, then you know exactly what's weird. So let's talk about this. In chapter 14, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses and he said, "This is the law of the leprous person for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look." This is day of cleansing. "Then if the case of the leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take for him, who is to be cleansed, 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. The priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood and the scarlet yarn and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. He shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the field. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, and shave off all of his hair, and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp, but live outside of his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he shall shave off all of his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He shall shave off all of his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes, and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean. We'll stop there. We're not done. But we got some weird, didn't we? So this is what happens. On the day of his cleansing, the priest comes out with his assistants. He does a full examination, concludes that yes, we are actually making the right call. This man is clean of his leprosy now. The priest commands that 2 clean living birds are brought to him with some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. He says, I want you to take an earthenware vessel with water in it, fresh water in it, and I want you to kill one of the birds over it so the blood falls down into the water. That's the purpose behind that. Then I want you to take this bundle, this cedar wood and scarlet yarn and hyssop and living bird, and he gives it to the priest. The priest holds all of it and dunks it into this earthenware vessel that has the water and the blood. Did you guys catch that? Has the water and the blood. Anyways, he brings it up. He sprinkles it 7 times onto the man who is to be cleansed, pronounces him clean, and he lets the living bird go into the open field. The one who is to be cleansed washes himself, washes his clothes, shaves all of his hair off, comes into the camp, lives outside of his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day, shaves again, washes everything again. On the 8th day, he's going to have more stuff to do. It's a pretty interesting process, isn't it? It's not as simple like normally, like, oh, you just went and did something inappropriate, you bring your goat. That's not what's going on here. This is in depth. Yeah.
Like, yeah, where are they finding all this water?
Right. This one doesn't take a ton of water, so you probably just have a small amount of it, because that doesn't take much to dip a bird. But yeah, they got a lot of water. And I imagine they got pretty good at washing with very little water. Because if that's what you did for your whole life, you get pretty good at that. Yeah. It is also interesting that it also is specific that you wash in water, which probably was not normal. Most of them they probably wash in sand. Yeah. All right. Does this remind you of another sacrifice? I know that's a broad question, but I'm kind of curious if anybody else picked up on it. Think about another day where several animals are brought, but at the end of the day, one of them is let go. Day of Atonement. This is bird version of Day of Atonement, isn't it? Where you've still got the blood involved, but you have the letting go of something. And so think about that symbolism here for a people that is rooted in the symbolism of their sacrifices. That God says to them, you are doing a smaller version of Day of Atonement. Your sin, your uncleanness is to such an extent that it has to be carried away from the camp for you to come back inside. That's intense. We're not talking about this guy got sick for a couple of weeks and then all of a sudden he gets to come back inside. No, this is a huge matter. You were separate. You were outside of the camp. You were no longer a part of God's chosen people. And now you're coming back in. This is huge for them. And so that's why it's so different. That's why you've got the living bird that has to be released. That's why you've got the other parts coming in to create this strong symbolism of you are becoming cleansed. That's why he is fully getting rid of all hair on his body, fully washing everything that he calls his own. Because he is leaving behind his full uncleanness and ensuring he brings no uncleanness into the camp. Any comments or thoughts before we get to the more normal side of becoming clean again?
There's been a lot of them. Did they have some provision for them outside the camp?
I think according to Leviticus, they did. They're considered poor Jews at that point. Somebody must provide for them. Yeah. They're not to be abandoned. Verse 10. On the 8th day, He takes 2 male lambs without blemish and 1 ewe lamb, a year old, without blemish, and a grain offering of 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and 1 log of oil. Now let's stop there for just a moment. This is a lot. Now in a moment he's going to talk about if you can't afford the lambs, you can also do it with birds. But just think about this for a moment. Who is getting leprosy? It is a person who still has wealth. Therefore he cannot be just kicked outside of the camp and separate from all of his things for decades, because then he has no wealth. No one can buy and sell with him. Nobody can help him with his herding. He is stuck. So notice that difference. This is a short-term thing. He still has his wealth. He still has all of his earthly possessions. They've not passed to his son because he is dead, in effect. So he can come back in and have 3 lambs and flour and oil and be able to give it a sacrifice. He can afford to. The priest who cleanses him shall be the man who is to be shall set the man who is to be cleansed, and these things before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest shall take 1 of the male lambs, offer it as a guilt offering along with a log of oil, and wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. And he shall kill the lamb in the place where they killed the sin offering, and the burnt offering in the place of the sanctuary. For the guilt offering, like the sin offering, belongs to the priest. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the right lobe, or on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall take some of the log of oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand, dip his right finger in the oil that is in the left hand, sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord, and some of the oil that remains in his hand the priest shall put on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of the right hand, on the big toe of the right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed. Then the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest shall offer the sin offering to make atonement for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanness. And afterward he shall kill the burnt offering. The priest shall offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean. Getting to be more normal, yet still super weird, right? Notice the process here. You've got 2 lambs, and 1 male lambs and 1 ewe lamb. The first lamb to be killed is a sacrifice of guilt offering. What's the purpose behind a guilt offering again? What's the purpose behind the guilt offering? What makes it different than a sin offering, I guess, is another way to look at it. Got to stretch all the way back to the first month. Yes, that's the big difference. With the sin offering, it's always that unintentional sin. You didn't mean to. You may not have even known you did it. But with a guilt offering, there is intentionality with it. Now, did this man go out and intentionally get leprosy? Probably not. But that is the severity level. We've already seen a Day of Atonement style cleansing. That's severe. Now we're seeing that you have to come back with a guilt offering. That's severe. You were unclean a while. That's the point. You were separate. You were gone from God. That's the point being made. So he has that. But notice that this is going to be a little bit different. When he does the guilt offering, he does some weird stuff with the blood. What does he do with the blood? Louder. Yeah. Perfect. I was going to ask the follow-up question, but you answered it for me. You were right there. This is why I married her. Yeah, this is consecration process. This is when a priest, go ahead, get embarrassed. This is when a priest is going from son of Aaron to priest. This is the same consecration. We even have the oil involved. We have oil that has to be brought forward. It's dipped 7 times and sprinkled on him. Sprinkled before the Lord. It's placed on the right earlobe, the right thumb, and the right big toe as well. He is fully becoming consecrated again. He is becoming God's again, because he used to not be. Leprosy is pretty intense. It's common, but it's intense. The priest then, it tells us in verse 19, he offers the sin offering to actually get rid of uncleanness. The guilt offering is to consecrate. The sin offering is to make atonement, to become clean again. The burnt offering is to reaffirm his dedication to God. All right, we'll cover very quickly 21 through the end of the chapter. We'll take some time on cleansing houses towards the end of the chapter as well. Next time, we'll get into chapter 15, and you can probably go ahead and read chapter 18 as well. So the rest of 14, 15, and 18. Thank you.
Teach me, Lord, to wait right down